Number one, yeah, if you have a small meeting, like we had a convention for 30 to 40 people, you might not need anything so formal. People can just especially if you know each other, you can be much more casual. But when a meeting gets up to over, I'd say 60, 70, it's important to have some sort of more formal procedure in place. And Roberts is as good as any, if not better than many other ones. And we have had in Kansas conventions up to, not this past year, but we have in the past couple of years, 80 people participating in the business session. And especially if you get up near 100 or more, then yeah, it's really important.
Those are numbers you want to have.
Yeah,
that's good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Second reason, it's good practice. So whether or not it's absolutely necessary at our state convention or for other organizations, if you have local, board meeting, or say the executive committee meeting, might not really be necessary to run the meeting so formally, but it's good practice for when and if you do go to, say, the National Libertarian Party convention, or even your local town council meeting or school board meeting, if they're using Roberts and parliamentary procedure, it's just good practice. And third reason, and I think this is actually the most important reason, is to make sure we are legal. As much as I want to say to hell with the state, we do what we want. I also don't want them shutting us down or taking away our ballot access, our minor party status. And if the wrong person learns that we did something out of procedure, contradictory to our bylaws, and our bylaws do say that we follow Robert's Rules of Order. So if the wrong person finds that out, they can actually make a case of it and say, we either should lose anything we did during the convention might be invalid. Those officers you thought you elected, not valid. Any work that you thought you just did during the those candidates that you elected to run for office, all invalid because we didn't follow our own bylaws or follow Robert's Rules of Order. So, or your minor party status, boom, So for the legal reasons, and again, I think that's the most important reason that we should be learning and following parliamentary procedure as much as possible, specifically, of course, our own bylaws. And to follow our own bylaws, we need to follow Robert's Rules of Order. Anything that isn't covered by the bylaws or the Constitution, or LPKS Constitution, you defer to Robert's RONR, which stands for Rules of Order Newly Revised. If there's any questions on that, I'm going to move on to just a few quick topics I had. But yeah, stop us or stop me. Any questions you have along the way?
A couple of details. Kansas still has a constitution and bylaws, separate documents?
Kansas Libertarian Party of Kansas. And Karen Ann did mention this. It would be a good idea to combine those two.
Yes, it would be. Colorado, it took us 5 years to get it done because of personalities within the state party trying to block it at every step, but we have it done now. Second point of order, you guys have any special rules going around? Special rules of order?
That's a great question, and I was going to bring that up, but we don't have any like ongoing permanent special rules, but I don't know if they would even be considered special rules if they were permanent.
Those would be standing rules.
Standing rules, right.
Yeah.
So what we did a couple of years ago, I guess I think I was the first, when I was state chair, I think I was the first one to introduce this. We did introduce special rules for the day, limiting debate, just what etiquette within the convention hall and stuff like that. Because, and I guess this is a good time to bring this up. If we don't have special rules like that, then you defer to Roberts. So for example, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, that would mean each person during debate gets to speak for 20 minutes.
Among other things, yes.
They get to speak 10 minutes once and then 10 minutes again. So if we didn't make a special rule saying, per topic,
per
yeah,
topic. Yeah.
for example. So that's why we make special rules at the beginning of the convention about that. And yeah, this actually brings me to one of my points. Well, what if you want to change those rules? What if you want to break those rules? Mike, can you tell us what's the procedure?
I mean, you mean in a convention environment, or?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
but yeah, so in all of these questions and all of these topics, I'm assuming we're talking about a convention environment, although it might actually be different if we were talking about a board meeting or an executive committee meeting. So yeah, let's mostly focus on convention.
They're parallel, but the general procedure, and it's a good rule of thumb to establish a permanent base set of convention standing rules. We call them conventional because they're a mix of special rules of order and standing rules. The advantage of that is that it minimizes the time spent in the state convention to possibly amend them, because they'll be established, they'll be the people will be used to them, and if there's any tweaks that happen to come on, it should be minor by instead of having to go through the whole thing every time. To amend them on a convention, it usually, unless your bylaws or your convention rules say otherwise, it would take a motion from the floor, either to suspend the rules, to amend those convention rules, depending on where you're at in the convention, or if you're at a point where you're adopting the rules, you can move to amend them at that point. In general, if you're in the middle of adopting the rules, then you can amend them by using a majority, but it would take a 2/3 any other time. I recommend that you make it 2/3 all the time, just for the sake of consistency. Plus, it also serves as a little extra buffer to protect members' rights from just having a simple majority, which is not a good term, a majority stampede over everybody.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And we actually did have both come up at this past convention. So at the very beginning, when we were adopting not the special rules, which I think that passed without objection, or at least without any debate, but the agenda, I made a motion to amend the agenda because there was non-party business that was inserted in between party business,
like a speaker or something, or
yeah, like 2 sessions. There was and I liked the speakers and things that were happening. One was political campaign, candidate recruitment, and how to campaign. Just, a little discussion from a couple of great guys whom I love, friends of mine, Matt and Dan. But it should have been done after all the convention business was done. And I believe Kirsten, another speaker, what was inserted in there before our elections, before the elections of our officers and our judicial committee. So I made the motion before the agenda was adopted to amend the agenda, and that failed. That failed. It was seconded and it was debated, but it did not receive a majority. So I thought we were doomed for the rest of the convention. Like, oh my gosh, people can't even agree to get the important business done first. But it ended up kind of working out. We did have enough time to do everything.
A good trick is if you want to insert speakers in the middle of a business, have them speak while your votes are being tallied for your elections. That takes pressure off of the tellers and whoever's tallying the votes to get it done. And it also occupies the time while it's being done. So it optimizes it.
I 100% agree. And there was some of that, but this was, a little more drawn out. So that would have only required a majority to amend the agenda before adoption. It's for you, Mike Seebeck, or anybody on the panel, actually. If we wanted to amend the agenda after adoption, say later during the day, I raised that question again and said, I want to change the agenda, what would the threshold be? Anybody?
It's 2/3. It's
Mike?
2/3.
Yeah, that would be 2/3 to adapt it.
But how do you adopt it? How do you do it? This is the other question.
Oh, I don't know. I just thought it would be another motion and a no. Tell us more.
You have to move to suspend the rules first because you're interrupting business in order to amend the agenda. Now, there's two ways you can do it. You can either move to suspend the rules and indicate that to amend the agenda by doing whatever you want to do as all one motion. The other way to do it is to move to suspend the rules to consider a motion to amend the amenda. To amend the agenda. I can talk, really. Sorry about that. And then once the rules are suspended, then you make a separate motion to amend the agenda. And that makes that motion debatable about how you want to amend it, because sometimes suspending the rules isn't debatable. And some people probably try to shortcut it, which can cut off some debate on certain things, and that can cause some trouble. So it's better to do the two-step process than the one.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. I have two other things, if everyone will indulge me. Everyone's favorite topic, call the question. Or I think I've heard Mike and Karen Ann say, call the question, bitches, on their show.
That's what the t-shirt says.
Technical term is previous question. So you would actually make the motion to move the previous question. Mike, I'm going to let you talk about that. Give us the ins and outs. What do people usually get wrong with when that comes up?
Well, there's two ways to work it. There is call the previous question, and then there's call all previous questions. Okay. Now they're a little bit different from each other, but they have a similar effect. Call the previous question just is to bring the current question before the body to a vote to end all debate and then move forward. Call all previous questions does that for all the layers that you're in for motions and amendments and so on, to bring everything to a vote back to the main motion. It ends debate all the way through. That's how they're parallel. Now, the way they work, though, is that they always require a second. It's not a debatable motion, okay? So you can't just say, well, I wanted to call the question. A lot of people love to engage in a debate point and then finish their debate point by calling the question. It's legal, but it's bad pool, okay? It's bad form. Because it's like, well, I'm going to sneak in the last word and cut everybody else off. It's just not good form. It does take a 2/3 to call the question. Here's the kicker, though. This is where a lot of people get it wrong, is that the 2/3 vote is on the motion to call the question, but it is not the vote for the question itself. That is a second vote. So if you get 2/3 to call the question, that passes. The next one is to actually vote on the question and whatever threshold that question has, whether it's a majority or 2/3, depending on what's going on. So it's not all encompassing. It causes two votes, one after the other, and that's
okay.
People try to skip a step sometimes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask what's probably a stupid question, but what's to keep successive calls to call the question? So one guy gets up, gives his spiel and says, I call the question. And then you got to vote on that. And then the next guy stands up who's on the other side of the issue, says, oh, yeah, well, what about blah, 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 blah. I call the question. I mean, how many times can they do that? Can the speaker shut that down on his own, or how does that work?
Individuals can call the question for a question at any given point. But if the motion to call the question passes, then there's no further debate. But if it fails, then if the current motion pending is debatable, then debate continues, and someone else can certainly do the same thing. If the same person tries to call it more than once, then the chair has the authority to rule that out of order and because they're being dilatory.
Now, Mike, I would even say not if the same person calls the question, but if anybody else calls the question and there hasn't been significant change of circumstances, it's dilatory.
That can be argued, yes. Doesn't
And
happen
this
very
happen-
often, but it can be argued.
If you, interestingly enough, was it just a couple weeks ago at the LNC? If you watched that, so there was debate. There were people speaking. I forget exactly what the main motion was, but for this example, that doesn't really matter. There was debate going back and forth. Someone made the motion for the previous question. In other words, they said, I call the question, and there was a vote. There was a vote taken on that, and it failed. It didn't get 2/3. It almost got 2/3. And then one more person spoke, and then somebody called the question. I would have said that's dilatory. I would have said, we're not even going to vote on whether or not to call the question at this point. There hasn't been, we just voted literally less than 2 minutes ago on whether or not to end debate. We're not going to vote again on whether or not to end debate.
So the only thing that happened was somebody else spoke in the meantime, and there was no amendments or anything like that going on.
There was nothing significant. I would say there was no significant change in the circuit. And I think that's what Robert says. I forget the exact wording, but you can't call the same motion to call the question again if there hasn't been any actual change,
Yeah, I believe that's correct. Yes, the argument there is that because there hasn't been any contextual change to what you're talking about, that a second calling of the question is dilatory. But on the other hand, it also has the circumstance of interfering with a member's right to make that motion. But the punchline for that is that you got to have some significant progress, which is where the member right gives way to the business of the body.
Right.
So you're right that it should have been called dilatory. That's also the chair's discretion.
Right. That's the chair's discretion.
Right.
So that's not, so that call by the chair that it's dilatory is not objectionable?
Any call.
It is that's what, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and that's another topic. I want to explore this topic a little bit more before we go to the topic of appealing the ruling of the chair and a point of order. Let's do that. Maybe probably after the break. The break is coming up upon us shortly, so remember we're going to meet back here. But still on the topic of calling the question or the motion for the previous question. What often happens at a convention is someone just yells out, "Call the question." Now, as Mike, I hope can confirm, it's not an interruptible. It's not something that you can interrupt. So in other words, you need to wait in line like everybody. Well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. The Libertarian Parliamentarian Meetup Mixer Discussion Fun Times Evening Group. So finishing that point about calling the question, the motion.
Yeah, where were we?
For the previous question. Yeah, we're talking about the previous question. That's funny. That's funny. You can't just stand up and yell and say, "I call the question," and then immediately everything stops and you have to take a vote on the motion. No.
You have to be recognized.
You have to wait your turn to be recognized. You shouldn't, if there is a line of people, and there really should be a line of people. That's one thing we did not do at convention this year or last year, is to have a line of people waiting to speak. I think that's important. You might, we're starting to debate something. You really feel important, really feel passionately about this topic. So you stand up. It takes courage to stand up in front of people, walk to the front of the convention hall and stand at the microphone if there is a microphone there, or stand in the designated spot and wait your turn.
I think we're in St. Louis at the National Convention in 2010, were you?
No.
Aaron Starr kept going up and down to the microphone so much, and I was sitting between him and the microphone that I felt like I was in a whack-a-mole game.
Nice. Mike, we can't see your
Every time I was
smiling
like,
face.
up, down, up, down, up. Oh, I'm here. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm kind of lounging on my bed.
Oh, fair enough. I like to see the tie-dye. So I don't think it's fair to those people. Yeah, to the people who've taken the time to get up there, stand, wait in line, that someone can just shout out from their seat, call the question. Well, those people were waiting to speak because they felt something, important about that motion. And also we're supposed to alternate people who are speaking in favor and opposed. So there it's helpful to have people standing in line so you can ask, okay, who's the next person in favor? Okay, who's the next person? Or just order yourself accordingly. So there's that. You can't just interrupt. You have to wait your turn if you want to call the question, and it needs a second, and then it requires a vote, a 2/3 majority to vote to call the question. Now, what the chair can do, and y'all may have heard people do this before. If someone says they call the question, or I move the previous question, the chair can say, is there any objection to ending debate and moving or voting on this question? And if nobody says,
second first,
you should get a second. Yes, that's true. Yeah. Although the chair, it's kind of in their prerogative to do so without a second, right, Mike?
No, it must have a second.
Okay, I might debate you on that. I think the chair can, if the chair does not want to wait for a second, they don't necessarily have to, especially
no, they need to have a second.
Okay. So let's say it's been seconded. The chair can just say, rather than voting, the chair can say, is there any objection to ending debate? And it's always a good idea to say ending debate, so it's clear what calling the question means. It means we're going to end any further debate, and we're going to take this vote either on, like Mike said earlier, on the most recent motion or the whole stack of motions. And you can do actually, any questions about moving the previous question, also known as calling the question?
Just to go back to one thing that was mentioned earlier, I actually took the time during the break to look this up. Yes, multiple attempts to call the question after one has failed is dilatory, and it's covered in Roberts 39.4 and 39.6, really. So,
okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and actually that was good for me because I had that was an area that was just obscure enough that it made me go look it up too. So I appreciate that.
I'm glad. Another subject that we talked about that in the first section here was suspending the rules, and that does require a 2/3 vote. It does require a second. There's no debate. And it requires a 2/3 majority. What we did wrong, here's one of the things we got wrong at our Kansas convention a couple of weeks ago. I made the motion to suspend the rules and change the debate. The debate time was 1 minute per person. David had suggested that was too short and we should do 2 minutes, and I agreed. So I made the motion to suspend the rules, change debate time to 2 minutes per person. David seconded it, and then we went into debate about whether or not we should suspend the rules.
Yeah, that's not debatable.
That's not debatable.
Yeah. One of the things that the Roberts folks put out, I don't know how well you can see this, but what can I cut off? Is they put out these little flashcards. They come in a set, and they're a wonderful cheat sheet for dealing with motions and all the different characteristics of it in terms of how to address these things. It saves time versus having to go leafing through the gazillion pages of Roberts.
Nice.
So
Stability.
they're a nice thing to have on hand.
Yeah, nice. Stability that I mentioned earlier, they have similar quick reference guides that you can download. And then not only did we debate it, there was a motion to amend that motion.
Can't
So
do that if it's to suspend. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I say the two-step process works better. In the two-step process, once you move to suspend, and then it goes to a motion to make the change you wanted, that's that's debatable and that's perfectly fine. So the two-step, it may take a hair longer, but it also gets more robust discussion, and it doesn't strong arm it through.
That's a good point. Just for anybody who was, just to clarify, at our Kansas convention, you recall, so I made the motion, let's change the debate time to 2 minutes. And then while we were debating that, somebody made the motion to amend my motion to suspend the rules and give each person the opportunity to speak twice for 1 minute each. And then we debated that motion. So we broke we did several things wrong there. We should not have been debating whether or not to suspend the rules and change the debate time. And then we should not have been trying to amend. That should have just been ruled out of order, a motion to amend that.
Yeah.
So yeah, next time, still learning all these things. And unless there's questions about calling the previous question, let's talk about what I think David started to mention earlier. Mike, could you bring us through, this is actually two topics in one. What is a point of order? How does that work? And then the follow-up, the possible follow-up to a point of order, an appeal.
Okay. A point of order, or more accurately known as a point of information, is a member stands up and they can raise a point of order without being recognized. Those can interrupt what's going on. Someone will stand up, say point of information or point of order. The presiding officer will recognize the person who raised the point of order. By the way, you mentioned the idea of having a line at the mic for these things. It's a good practice. In relation to that, it's a good thing for the people in line to make sure amongst themselves of what they're talking towards. Because if someone's waiting to say talk on the main motion, but you're at the amendment level, it's better to let them step back and let people talk on the amendment talk first, just to keep things in the right part of the debate. But anyway,
and if I may, Mike, so that's really the job of the chair, to be kind of directing the people in line. Was there anyone else who would like to speak on whatever is the most immediate thing at hand? And then so on and so on. And yes, you're right. Maybe someone has a privileged motion, which we're talking about now with the point of information, point of order.
Right. Now, the way the point of order goes, they get recognized, they raise the point of order, they're asking the chair about something or rather, and the chair can either rule that the point is well taken and act or adjust things accordingly, or they can rule that the point is not well taken. And they don't have to give a reason, but it's a good idea to give one. If the point is ruled not well taken, then the right to appeal from the ruling of the chair can be brought into play. That does require a second. And it is debatable, but the way that debate works is that the chair gets the final say on the debate before the body moves to a vote on whether to overturn the ruling of the chair. It's a little bit, and that takes a majority to do that, but it's a majority in the negative. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy, and this is one thing with Roberts I can't stand, is that the way that they're saying this is that it takes a majority of a vote on the question in the no to overturn the ruling of the chair, because the question is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? And a yes majority sustains the ruling of the chair, and a no majority vote overturns it. I personally can't stand that, because it is exactly backwards from practically everything else in Roberts. To my reckoning, And even though it's not necessarily the officially proper way to do it in Roberts, the better way to say is, shall the ruling of the chair be overturned? And then you have a majority yes to overturn, and a majority no sustains it. That's consistent with the rest of Roberts, and it's a lot easier to understand for everybody. I've been yelling at the Roberts folks to change that. Who knows if they ever get that in the 13th or not? We'll see. But the trick for that one is that it's the reverse of a normal motion.
Yeah.
Which can throw a lot of people out of whack.
Yeah. And that brings up the importance of the chair restating the vote and the parameters, the threshold before the vote. Just to really clarify that, I would want to say, all right, the vote is whether or not to sustain the ruling of the chair. A yes vote will, and what the implication would be, it would mean that that point of order that was not well taken will still not be well taken, and we will continue to not do that business, or whatever that particular ruling was. A no vote will overturn the ruling of the chair, and yeah, you would need a majority of no's. In other words, more than half to say no to overturn the ruling of the chair. All you need is half yes to sustain, because if you have exactly half, suppose there's 100 people in the room and exactly 50 of them vote yes, sustain, then the ruling of the chair is sustained because there was not a majority to overturn. And I agree, it gets confusing, but you want to really clarify that before,
and that goes to another good point, which is that for motions in general, it's a good idea for the chair, right before you agree to a vote, to restate the motion. So it's crystal clear to everybody what's going on. And people will ask for that as a point of information anyway. And those are all, that type of point of information is always well taken.
Yeah.
Because people need to know what they're voting on.
Yeah. The chair. So when someone makes a motion, the chair should repeat it. If it's been moved and seconded, that such and such. So that's before you even go to a vote. And then after there's debate, and then you're about to go to, if it's debatable, and then you're about to go to a vote, yes, the chair should repeat it again. So it's very clear what you're voting on. Referring back to that last LNC meeting, Angela, God bless her, that time when someone called the question again, she went right into a vote without repeating, and half the people thought they were voting on whether or not to call the question. Half the people thought they were voting on the main motion. It turned it. God bless her, because she had a baby in tow or something. She was a little bit distracted. I think Angela's great, but it's just a good example of how you can be. It's important to really be clear about those things, and so make sure everyone knows what they're voting on. Turned out nobody was going to change their vote. It didn't impact it, and nobody was going to change their vote anyway, so it was fine. But yeah, it's a good example of that. Other comments, questions about what is a point of order? Anybody who's in the group here, or how you can appeal that? I don't think there's anything wrong with appealing the ruling of the chair. People sometimes get tense about stuff like that, like, ooh, there's a fight going on. Ooh, they're being rude to each other. It's not. It's just people are disagreeing. There's a disagreement about what procedure happened, or what, the events, how they're supposed to unfold. And this is
I've appealed rulings of the chair when Karen Ann was running committees because I disagreed with her.
There's no,
which made people go, "Ooh, what the heck?" But no, we're best buds. It's nothing personal.
No love lost. I've heard it referred to as, recently I've heard someone refer to this, all this parliamentary stuff, as cat fighting. Has anyone heard this recently? Is referred to as cat fighting? Well, I don't think it's cat fighting. I think it's people who feel passionately about what should be done and what business needs to transact and how it's, and by following rules and procedures, it's actually the opposite of cat fighting, in my opinion. It's an orderly way of doing things so that it gets done efficiently, and it protects the rights of the members. To make
I used to call it parliamentary foosball. because of the way things go back and forth and back and forth. And I got into this just because I got sick and tired of people who were more or better versed on this than me, stomping all over people like me. It's like, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to learn this stuff so that they can't do that anymore.
And we need more members, both within the Libertarian Party of Kansas, and nationally, to learn these things. Even just learn a few basics like we're going over tonight. What does it mean? What is a point of order? What does it mean to call the previous question? Learn a few basics so that you're better able to handle it. The members need to learn it, and of course, whoever's running the meeting needs to learn it as well. And that person should have a parliamentarian, professional, soon to be professional, such as yourself, Mike, as someone there to refer to, just as a resource. Okay, go ahead.
Roberts also has a publication called Robert's Rules in Brief, which could give it's nowhere near the size of a full Roberts, but it does a good summary rundown of a lot of these things, which also was a good place to start for people to learn.
Great.
Is there a Robert's Rules of Order for Dummies yet?
There actually is.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. It's been out for several years. I don't vouch for how good it is, though.
I haven't gotten that either, but so yeah, if you don't want to get the full version, there is I forget what they call it, but it's
Robert's Rules of Briefs. Yeah.
Well, Sarah has one that literally is for dummies.
I never cracked it open, but I did buy it. Yeah, it's for dummies. But I think I also got the in brief too.
Yeah,
I did.
Which is that one.
Yeah, that's the in brief.
Yep, there it is. That's
put out by the same people as Roberts.
It actually back references in there back to the main Roberts too. So
yeah, cool. Yeah, I should get those other two. Who else has questions? We've got about 15 minutes according to my clock. Other questions, other topics we haven't even covered yet. I have a couple other things I can bring up, but I definitely would rather, if there's anything nagging or just things that make you go, or Mike, even if you had any other juicy nugget you wanted to touch on.
It's always a fun time when you raise a point from the floor that makes the chair go scrambling for their copy of Roberts. I'll say that.
Yeah, if they have one.
I did that in California with one of my favorites, objection to consideration of the question. It was hilarious. The chair had to have got these real bug-eyed look at what the hell's that? He literally almost dove for his Roberts book to figure out what was going on.
That's almost like saying something's just out of order, but it's not, is it? Can you tell us more about objection consideration of the question?
It's usually raised when a main motion is so egregious, so offensive, so outrageous, so ridiculous that it's like, why is this even being considered? It's not used very often. It is a little odd because there's a specific timing to raising it. And the timing for it is that you have to raise it after the motion has been made, but you have to make it before anybody speaks on it. So it has to be raised like right at that point between the motion and debate starts. It interrupts everything. And this is one of these oddball things. It doesn't require a second, and it's not debatable. It can't amend it. And again, you have to have one of these reverse votes again. But this time it's a 2/3. Similar to what appeal was, the opposite of that, opposite direction. In this case, a 2/3 vote in the no will toss out the question before it goes anywhere.
Gotcha.
So if 1/3 are in favor of hearing it, well, then it goes forward.
Gotcha. It's one of those things.
It's not used very often.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things you hope that if it is an egregious thing, like if someone makes a motion that we should make a resolution that the Libertarian Party of Kansas supports communism, or,
Yeah.
it shouldn't even get a second. You know, hopefully it just
No.
dies for lack of a second. But if for whatever reason, yeah.
It gets a second, then you do that. Yeah. It's like, no, wait a minute. But yeah,
Good.
that's one of the more rare ones. It can happen, but it doesn't happen too often. So occasionally you get some of the weird things happen. So
Here's something I wanted to bring up. And it happened at our convention, our 2023
Mhm.
Libertarian Party of Kansas convention. When votes, all of the votes were counted, and that's kind of the chair's prerogative. He didn't do any voice votes, and that's fine. He just wanted to be really thorough, and so everything was a counted vote. And because
Okay.
there was less than 40 people there, it didn't take too long to do so.
sure.
But they counted abstentions.
Mhm.
And I knew it was wrong to do so. I didn't make too much of a fuss. The secretary said, yeah, we want to count that. And it bothered me more afterwards, like, or during the days following the convention. I'm sorry that I didn't fight for that. I should have objected to that. And because if a member wants to be anonymous and not vote, they shouldn't have to stand up and say, I abstain. This isn't at the executive committee meeting or board meeting or something
Mhm.
like that, where you need to record if someone abstains. This is the general convention. So that was out of order, and I really should have fought for that. Any thoughts on that?
I don't understand the
Well-
problem, Ned. I mean, nobody had to vote on yes, no, or abstain.
Yeah. So when let me just I agree, David, you're right. But let me just backtrack for anybody who's not following what we're doing. So it was a counted vote. So those who wish to vote aye, please stand. And he went around count, you know, you could sit down. And then those who wish to vote no, please stand, and he counted. And then those who wish to abstain, please stand. And you're right. It could have, at that point, you didn't literally, no one was forcing you. No one was watching to see if you didn't stand for the yes or the no. So they're going to physically force you to stand for the abstain. That's true. You could have just stay seated. So in that sense, it was inaccurate anyway. It was inaccurate. It didn't really prove how many people abstained, because they might have, this is going to sound weird, they might have abstained from the abstention vote.
Right.
But it's improper to even ask them. You're putting them on the spot. Some members are going to feel like they have to, I didn't vote yes. I didn't stand for the other two. Maybe I should stand for, you have the right to just be silent. If you're not a board member, you're not an elected official of at the monthly executive committee meeting. So I don't know. Does that answer your question, David?
Well, yeah, I guess I just, like you said, you can always abstain from abstaining. You can just sit there.
Yeah,
I think the question for me, and as I recall, it was, and not to say it was right to do it, but as I recall, it was a member initiated thing. Somebody raised their hand and said, so I'm going to abstain on this vote. And then that's when we started having abstains on every vote. But
no, the secretary asked for it specifically.
Okay, all right. Well, we remember that differently then. But my question is, in counting the abstains, the question I had at the time, and I guess I still have, is those votes count then. And if something takes 2/3 to pass, it's not just yays and nays. The abstains actually, in essence, count as nays because they're not yays. Am I right about that?
Okay. No, this is where it gets crazy. Okay, an abstention does not count for either as a no vote for or against the vote threshold required for the motion. Only the yays and the nays do. Abstention should not factor doing any type of non-written, non-roll call vote. If you have a standing, you have a voice vote, you don't do abstentions. If you do a rising or a counted vote, you don't do abstentions. If you have a roll call vote, you do abstentions. If you have a written ballot for whatever reason, and it's best to keep those two elections. They can put abstain, or in our case, NOTA, on there as well. But no, abstentions don't count for determining whether a motion passes or fails. They might as well be not in the room, is what it comes down to. So, for example, if you've got 40 people in the room and you need a majority vote to pass a motion, which is 21, but you have, that's assuming everybody's voting, but let's say you only have 35 people vote. Okay, say if 5 people are not voting, say they're stepped out to go to the bathroom or whatever, they're not voting, or that's considered the same as an abstention. So then all of a sudden, the 35 votes, you need to get your 18 to get your majority to pass that motion, not the full 21, because the people weren't in there. So the threshold is based on the number of votes cast, not on the total people. However, and this is where there's a point to this also. This is where knowing what your quorum numbers are comes into play as well, because you need to make sure that your voting tallies total are below your last quorum numbers, because if they're over the quorum numbers, you've got a problem. You've got too many people voting versus who are supposed to be there, and then you have a whole different can of worms. The easy way to resolve that is to do an immediate quorum call. And you can interrupt the vote to do a quorum call if the numbers are disputed. They try to say that you shouldn't interrupt a vote for anything. That's an exception, because if you don't have, if you don't have the right number of people involved, well, you have a total problem. Because that's actually a contesting a vote, because, oh, well, our quorum says we have 40 people in the room. We have 45 votes. What the heck? That's a legitimate problem that needs to be addressed on the spot.
And the opposite problem of not meeting quorum. So you might want to check to make sure there's still, in our case, at least half those registered for the convention are still in the room. So if there's 40 people registered for convention, quorum is 20 for us. I think for Robert's rules, it would be more than half. It would be 21. But for Kansas, it's half.
Your mileage may vary. I mean, depends on your bylaws.
So suppose quorum is 20, let's just say, and there's a vote where there's 11 in favor and or let's make it even simpler. Let's say there's 10 in favor and 5 opposed. Well, that's only 15 people. It's not clear whether or not there's a quorum. At least the minutes might not show that there was enough votes to make a quorum. So that case, it might be appropriate to ask for those abstaining, or if not, just the chair to make a assertion that there's still a quorum present in the room, something in that case. But otherwise, getting back to that point, David, yes, no one was physically forced to stand up when asked for abstentions, but it's kind of an intimidation thing, and it's not fair. You should not ask for counted abstentions. They don't know that a member might not know they have the right to just stay seated. They might feel pressure, peer pressure, and then they might vote yes or no when they didn't want to vote at all. They might not feel that they have enough knowledge about the motion to make an educated vote, and they would rather abstain, and that is their right. But because they know they're going to be asked to stand up, they might vote yes or no. So no, you should not call for the abstentions to be counted unless it's a roll call vote, like Mike just said.
And as for a board who can also run their meetings under small board rules, which are a little bit different from the mainline ones, roll call votes are generally the best approach. They're representative of the party as a whole. They should be on the record as to what they're voting on.
Right.
Well,
So,
I will agree with you, Ned, that if they don't count toward anything, or if they don't figure into whether or not a motion passes or a person gets elected or what have you, then I agree. There's no point in asking for them.
Yeah, and hopefully Mike made that clear, so if the threshold is what's required for something to pass, a motion, election, or whatever it is that if the requirement is a majority of those present and voting, it's a majority of those present and voting. There may have been 40 people registered for the convention, but only 30 people are actually voting on that thing. Then only 30 are present and voting. So it's only the threshold is a majority of that 30. So in other words, more than half, so more than 15, it would be 16 is required. It doesn't matter how many people abstain. That doesn't change.
Well, and your point's well taken. I guess for me, at least at the time of the convention, I started to get the vibe that it was working the other way, that there were people who didn't want to go on the line as being for or against something. So, hey, I'm just going to abstain.
Which is always their right, but it's not, you don't have to demonstrably do so. You can just quietly do so. I think we've exhausted that topic unless anyone has further thoughts about it. This might be a good place to end. If you're in the Kansas City area, come to our mixer next Tuesday at Amigos. Join the Meetup group or the Facebook group for Kansas City area Libertarians. Does anybody else have anything they would like to plug? We talked about.
It's a 13-hour drive for me. I'll just put this out though, guys. I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook, and my LPDA page is out there, and I'm in the national database too. If you guys have parliamentary questions, bylaws questions, shoot them at me. I'm more than happy to work with anybody in the party on getting them sorted out and providing some information and clarity for you guys.
Well, you talked about the merger of the Constitution and the bylaws. I think that is something we really should consider here in Kansas. An interesting situation. Well, I won't get into it here. It's an interesting situation in Kansas as far as bylaws and bylaws committees, and I'll just leave it at that.
Every
Anybody
state
else?
has their quirks on those.
Anybody else? Thoughts, questions, things you want to plug? I thought tonight was successful. I was delighted that I didn't have to start to admonish and whine and complain to all of you for not showing up. Again, like some people I've heard lately who start to chastise their target audience for not. That's kind of an inside joke. If you watch the video from the keynote speech at our convention, what you want to do is call your target audience a bunch of idiots.
And a debate society.
Yeah.
I think my gripe about that was I don't mind the come to Jesus moment at all. I think there's a lot of people that need to be told, what are you waiting for? They need the little push to action, but there was 40 other minutes that he could have used to give us updates on Defend the Guard around the country, where we left off here in Kansas in our last legislative session, what other states are doing successfully. Any number of things could have been put in that time, and I was just really frustrated. And then I had originally, and then like the back and forth, because I was one of the 4 that actually did sign up for the activism training. Then it was canceled. And then he said after that he was still going to have it. And then it was going to be at noon on Sunday. And it's like, I can't wait around Topeka for no reason for 4 hours. Like, that's crazy.
How many times I've said that driving back and forth to college.
Yeah. And I totally agree, Sarah. You're spot on.
That was just, I spent money. I mean, I don't know.
Spent money for that. I kept waiting for the shift. Okay, here's that hard line, and now let's shift it to the positive and the uplifting. And
right.
I do get it. To be fair, maybe he was put in a awkward situation where he was promised something or told to expect a number of people and people to sign up for it, and it didn't get it or whatever. But yeah, we can do better. We can be more supportive, uplifting, as I have found to swing it. How do you like this little swinging it around here? I have found this tonight's get together quite uplifting and informative. I thank each and every one of you for participating, and maybe let's do it again sometime.
Thank you, Ned. This was fun.
Thanks for coming,
Thanks,
everybody.
Ned.
Thanks a lot.
Stuff, everybody.
See you later, guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
See ya on the convention floors.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.